Kristen Howerton, and I'm a Democrat.
I'm Paul Martin, and I'm a conservative.
We are two friends and political junkies trying to have a civil conversation about politics.
And we are on our second episode. There's a ton in the news, and our vision is to talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
Try not to get too heady. Try to be civil. And try to explain stuff.
Yes. Yes. I hope we can be informative. I hope that this is something that people can listen to and say, oh, I actually learned what's going on for the past few weeks.
Completely. And the reality is there's maybe 10% of the country that's engaged right now. Mm-hmm. And so if you're one of the unengaged, this is a show where we want you to engage more.
Yeah.
This isn't for the wonks. This is for the everyday folk that are just trying to figure out what's going on and make informed decisions.
Absolutely. All right. So we are rounding up to March. Mm-hmm. And what has happened in the last few weeks?
Well, we've had another primary.
Yes.
We had Michigan yesterday, which we'll talk about. There was a unique wrinkle with the Democrats.
There sure
we had
was.
South Carolina. Nikki Haley is the only other Republican in the race. She's continuing to stay in the race, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. Trump's beating her by between 20 and 30 points in the last two primaries. But, she's running for 2028 right now. She's getting a lot of name ID.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's burned her bridges. So if for whatever reason Trump couldn't be the nominee, the party would come together and she would not be
You think
their
she
pick.
would not be it?
Well, just she's been too outspoken against him. She's really come out in the last month and taken the gloves off. And so I really like her. She's the kind of Republican I would vote for. I mean, not on every issue, but she's sane in my view.
So here's a question for you that I don't know the answer to this, but I think maybe you do. Will she be on the ballot? Like how in a primary, right? We're choosing the Republican candidate. Would she still be on the ballot if she had a certain amount of votes?
Yeah, it just comes down to delegates. Okay. And there right now, the Democrats and the Republicans have a different system. I forgot what the number is for the Republicans, but you have to get to a certain number. And so
and then there could be two Republicans officially on the ballot
just
as Republicans. It'll only be one.
Yeah, it'll be one.
What.
Yes.
Okay.
At some point, Trump will clinch the nomination once he gets to that amount of delegates.
Right.
And that'll probably be on Super Tuesday when a ton of the delegates are awarded.
So come November, her name won't be on the ballot in any significant way unless she
crazy was to happen.
Okay, got it. So she's not going to be stealing votes from Trump in the national election.
I mean, some people will write her in, but no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what happened in Michigan.
Yes.
So, Michigan has a significant Muslim population. Mm-hmm. And I think...
And is it Muslim or Palestinian or both? I know there's crossover.
It's not particularly Palestinian, but it is Muslim and Arab.
Yeah.
Particularly Dearborn, Michigan has a really, really probably, I think, the highest concentration of Arabs in one place in the United States. I think what's interesting about this, though, is... There's this assumption that this happened because of the Arab population. I don't think this is just Arab people. I really don't. Mm-hmm. I think that there are a wide swath of Democrats who are very unhappy with what's happening in Gaza and the U.S. support of that, and that wanted to register a bit of a protest.
Right.
And so a number of people voted uncommitted as sort of an act of protest to sort of register their voice.
Right.
And so
what was the word they used again? Non-committed?
Uncommitted.
Uncommitted.
Yeah, uncommitted.
It's almost like there was a candidate called Uncommitted. I was watching last night.
Yeah. And so I think it did send a message. I mean, it was a not insignificant number.
No,
I think that they ended up getting 2 delegates for uncommitted, and Biden got 115.
Right.
Which is, significant.
Yeah.
The uncommitted votes beat Biden's opponent. What's his name?
I forgot.
I can't even remember his name.
That's pretty bad. Dean Phillips.
There we go. So uncommitted beat Dean Phillips. So it was pretty significant. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm wondering if other states will follow suit. If other states will come up with a way that they want to register. Because it's, at this point, and I understand a lot of people are upset, like you're handing a vote to Trump, but in the primary, I think this act of protest is sending a message
I completely
that can
agree.
be walked back in November.
100%. Let's just unpack something. Sometimes I think we assume people understand things that are complicated. So Arab, the word Palestinian, and
Yes.
the word Muslim
Yes.
are three different entities.
Not all the same
To be
thing.
clear,
Yes.
Islam is a religion.
Correct.
Some Palestinians and some Arabs are not Muslims.
Absolutely. I
And
think
Arabs would
yeah.
refer to people from the region, Palestinians, people from Palestine, which is the country within the country we now call Israel. So just to be clear,
Yes.
there are distinctions there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because I think a lot of people don't understand that there are a number of Christians in Palestine.
Yes.
I have been in the occupied region known as Palestine or the West Bank. I have visited churches and Christian pastors there. So yeah, I think that's a really good distinction to make.
I agree with you. We're very uptight today, but what happened yesterday in Michigan is, in my view, democracy at its best. People have a view on the war, the conflict, whatever you want to call it, in Palestine, Israel. They're very upset about it.
Yeah.
There is a particular congresswoman, Tlaib, I've forgotten her name, sorry, but and there's this constituency, and it's a beautiful thing to see happening.
Yeah.
That's what this democracy is about. And it is sending a message, and it could end up shaping foreign policy.
I think it
Most
could.
certainly Biden is more keen to do as well as he can, if you will. So I thought it was a beautiful thing to see protest done in the right way.
I agree, and I'll say, and I know that you and I want to do a deeper dive on Israel and Palestine, but I think for me personally, if Californians banded together and said this is how we're voting this, I would be down because I want to register my dissent of this as well. So I agree that it was an interesting act of democracy.
And we will spend more time on the issue. It's such a thorny issue. I think it's the hottest. I think it's the most provocative issue, perhaps even more than abortion. And we'll talk about a decision in Alabama that took place in the last week or so. But there is such passion and intensity around this issue. And you saw it last night.
Well, and I also think another interesting byproduct of the way people voted is there have been a number of news outlets that have not wanted to touch the Palestine conflict. We're seeing major news outlets that have done very little coverage of it, but they cannot ignore this kind of voting.
Yeah.
This is now it's become relevant to U.S. politics.
Yeah.
Before it was like, well, we can just ignore it because this is like something happening in another country.
Right.
This made it relevant. News outlets had to talk about this last night, and they did talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing too.
Yep. Well, we'll cover that very, very thorny, difficult issue another time.
We will, but I do want to talk about one other thing that did happen this week, which was a young Air Force member, an active duty Air Force member, Aaron Bushnell. He was 25, and he worked in defense operations for the Air Force. And he was a young man who was raised in a very religious community. He wanted to go serve his country. He did that. And over the past, several months became very disillusioned at what was happening in Palestine and what he perceived as many of us do, just the U.S. sort of aiding and abetting a genocide. And so in a very extreme and disturbing act of protest, he set himself on fire and ended up dying from his injuries. But he set himself on fire in front of the Israel embassy in Washington, D.C. And it definitely, I think that was yet another event that just... It's incredibly disturbing, and I don't condone that kind of behavior, but
Sure.
I understand his desperation. I understand that he really, truly wanted to do something that would help these people that he felt helpless over.
That's going all in. Reminds us of the Buddhist...
The Buddhist monk.
During
That's
the
right.
Vietnam War.
That's right.
That was harrowing. Right. There is most certainly a lot of passion around the issue.
Yeah. Very much so.
Very
and I
sad.
think, I think that was another, I think that we can no longer ignore how passionately people feel about this. I don't think it's a fringe thing. I think that this is something that is well beyond the Arab community or the Palestinian community. I think, we're seeing a 25-year-old white male from, middle America who enlisted in the army or the military and, was that upset about it.
Without going too far into it, here we go. I mean, yes, it definitely, in my view, especially based on some of the initial comments from the Congresswoman, and I know her constituents are predominantly Palestinian or Muslim or both. It's another issue where you have the left and then you have the left. And this has most certainly grabbed the hearts and the minds of the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And that's just a reality. Younger voters care about this issue a lot.
Yeah.
Older voters don't, unless probably they're Palestinians or Muslims.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. All right, we will put a pin in that topic.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the Alabama embryo law that you just mentioned. So in the state of Alabama, it went to their state Supreme Court. It's a really interesting case because I don't think it was actually brought forward around abortion. It was brought forward because there were some couples that were doing in vitro. They had their their embryos destroyed, and they sued. And it was decided that they were basically awarded as if the embryos were living people. So it was a destruction of life. So suddenly that is decided, and now we have a law that says embryos in Alabama are living people. And suddenly all of the in vitro clinics closed up shop.
Yeah, and it does come from a 1872 wrongful death law. So they're basing it on case law.
On that precedent.
On that precedent, which declared, and I quote, "the public policy of this state to recognize and support the sanctity of unborn life and the rights of unborn children," unquote. And so that was the precedent that the Alabama Supreme Court was using in their 8-1 majority, protecting, if you will, what they deemed to be, quote, unborn children. What struck me is their Chief Justice, Tom Parker, who said, and I quote, "Human life cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of a holy God," unquote. And this is a judge.
Yeah. Though, I think what's interesting about this one is I think that there's a perception that Christians across the board are in support of this. But this to be true. We've both, grown up in Christian circles. Christians are not against in vitro fertilization.
Right.
That's not an evangelical thing. In fact, I know lots of evangelicals who have done it. I believe Mike Pence has spoken up, and I believe he and his wife may have conceived that way, but he's spoken against this. So this is a really tricky thing where the fight for the unborn had this sort of far-reaching consequence that I don't think was necessarily even intended.
Yeah. Well, it mirrors the abortion issue, where close to 80% of the country, I believe, is pro-choice. And yet the Republican Party has found a masterful way, this is just stating the fact, I'm not weighing in, to use this issue and use it in certain states, and most certainly use it with the election of judges, to appoint judges, to impose laws that go against the will of the people.
Yes.
And that's the reality in the nation right now. And to the Republican Party, of which I still am a member, that's really all they have in many ways are these laws, because they don't have the issues in their favor, like with abortion. Most people are pro-choice
Yeah.
or with the LGBTQ issue. Most people really don't care that much who you marry or who you love. But they're able to appoint judges. They're able to, you know, very masterfully, if you will, find ways to change legislation. But I think that old dog's going to lose its tricks soon enough as the country continues to go further left.
I think they will too, but you know, it's just a very sad state of affairs for infertile couples in Alabama. And I mean, my heart really goes out to them because I dealt with infertility. I didn't do IVF, but I did other kinds of treatments. And, you know, I think that people's families are in limbo right now. People have embryos that they have, you know, placed on ice, waiting to implant and build their families, and now they can't. And it's very sad. I can't imagine how stressful that must be for those couples.
It gets to some very complex ethical questions that are hard to answer. For example, the Roman Catholic Church still to this day, they don't like to say we were wrong. Of course, you know, with Copernicus, I don't remember when they finally said, okay, I guess you're right. The Earth does revolve around the sun. But they just don't, because by tradition, the word of the Pope is infallible. That's the way the ballgame works.
Right.
And so for them to retract, so still to this day, they are pro-life, including anti-birth control. They still are.
Yeah.
They have not reeled that back in because in order to do that, they have to say I was wrong. And with this particular issue, it kind of reminds me of where the Catholic Church is with respect to birth control. They are binary. They are saying, look, a living sperm is life of a sort, and to let it run away without finding. I don't know what the
there is a Bible verse about that.
Okay, maybe there is.
There is an Old Testament Bible verse about not spilling your seed, not wasting any.
99% of Roman Catholics don't buy it. They use birth control,
this is true.
But the theology of the church remains
the
binary.
Stance.
Yes, and this reminds me of that. It's this very rigid view that something that you couldn't even see with the human naked eye is a living human being. And I studied ethics. Both my degrees are in philosophical ethics, and it's a really, really difficult issue. If you look at it from that very hard line, literal viewpoint, sure, it's life. 99% of people would say, what are we doing here?
Well, I saw a meme that said, you know, if you put me in a freezer for several months, I would die because I'm a living thing. An embryo is not a living thing. That's why you can freeze it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But
and there are a lot of people have done thought experiments. You know, if there was a fire at the hospital and it was full of, who are we going to go save?
Yeah.
You know, there's just not any kind of sense in which we would fight to protect the life of a frozen embryo. But the wrath of God for those who don't agree.
Yeah, well, that's going to be tricky, and I really hope that does not create any kind of precedence in other states.
Yeah, uncharted waters.
Well, let's talk about the Trump stuff. So he just had things not go in his favor in court again this week.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so he has a explicit plan, and he's used this for many decades, which is to deny and delay.
Yeah.
Right? And so he denies everything. Every single lawsuit against him is Joe Biden. He's a martyr now. He said he's a dissident recently, a political dissident, which is interesting. But his legal goal is to delay. And so this is about the election interference case, which is in the jurisdiction of the Washington, D.C. court, Jack Smith, and this was appealed based on this idea of presidential immunity, which is insane when you think about it. So Trump is basically saying that, and his lawyers are saying that a president is immune from criminal prosecution for official duties that he performed or she performed while in office. And the idea behind it kind of makes some sense, which is if the president, dropped a bomb on, I don't know, in Israel or against some group, and it killed some innocents, these innocents later, after the president's not in office, could sue the president.
Right.
And criminally, the president could be brought to justice and thrown in prison. And so Trump's making an argument that there should be absolute 100% immunity
while you're in office. You could murder someone.
For official acts, presidential acts performed while in office. And so when it was appealed, one of the judges in New York had this, I'm sorry, I keep saying New York, in Washington, D.C. had this incredible thought experiment, I guess, if you will. And it was Judge Florence Pan, and she said to Trump's lawyer, yes, no question, could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached be subject to a criminal prosecution?
Yeah.
And so Trump's lawyer, I saw this and watched him, and he equivocated, and she said, so your answer is, she nailed him because he couldn't say absolutely. So, but the Supreme Court, I watched some legal scholars today. A few of them said they expected the Supreme Court to hear this case because it's so monumental that they felt that they needed to weigh in. Others think that the lower court, which unanimously said BS, the president cannot be immune from anything. They're not kings. And so it's very possibly going to delay the trial to after he's in office if he gets elected.
It just keeps pushing things back things back.
That's the goal.
And then additionally, in New York State, he was charged with fraud. And so that fraud was around real estate. So apparently he and his, company, including, I believe, both of his sons and maybe his son-in-law, were misrepresenting things to the banks in a way that benefited them. And so New York State said, you know what, we're going to take back, basically we're going to charge you with the amount that you wouldn't have gotten had you been honest. And so he was charged with fraud, and now he has to pay back New York State to the tune of $450 million, which is a lot of money.
Times $500 million. And the crimes were fairly black and white. It was, if you watch the hearings, there wasn't really any evidence that they brought. In one case, he inflated the square footage of his penthouse by 3 times.
Wow.
And so
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, you can't make that mistake, especially if you're a real estate developer.
Right.
And so it wasn't, in that case, they were like, wait, it's, I think, 10,000 square feet, and you said it's 30,000 square feet. That allows higher appraisals, which allows him to borrow more money for lower interest rates. And one of the arguments they tried to make in that case was there was no harm.
It was a victimless crime.
It was a victimless crime, but that's not the way our judicial system works. If someone goes to rob a bank and they try to shoot the guard and they miss, you don't get off because you missed. That's just not the way our judicial system has ever worked. It should not work that way. And so, but I want to back up and, I said in the last episode that my goal to my Republican friends is to, we're in just this world right now where if you don't agree, if you don't toe the party line, if you have any free thoughts at all, you're a Republican name only or you're a liberal. This is just where my party has gone. And it's insane because the claim that is being made by the Trump campaign and tens of millions of his voters isn't just that he won the election in 2020. I mean, he didn't win. Nobody thinks he won. His own people that he appointed in his cabinet, Bill Barr. I mean, this whole thing has come up because his own appointees were trying to talk him out of this incredible claim that he was trying to make, that this was all rigged. And so that ship has sailed. But another part of the conspiracy theories that go on today is this idea that this is all Joe Biden. Now think about this for a second. All the lawsuits, E. Jean Carroll. Civil lawsuits.
Well, that's the
lawsuits in different states.
That's the narrative he's creating.
It's the narrative that he's created. And again, he creates these narratives. That, I mean, there's so many of them. But what is incredible to me is just the lack of, I mean, you realize what type of apparatus would be necessary for an individual like Joe Biden to reach into the New York State judicial system, the New York City judicial system.
These are behaviors that Trump engaged in. He engaged in fraud. He engaged in the rape of a woman. And this idea that someone forced him to engage in these behaviors is so ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the party line is that Joe Biden, it's political prosecution.
Yeah.
It's what he calls, and this is out of the Russian playbook that goes back 100 years. It's election interference. Watch what he's doing.
Yeah.
He clearly interfered in the last election. That's, his own appointees said, this was interference in terms of interfering in the outcome of Joe Biden winning by, was it 7 million votes or something? But the point is, his base is so loyal, and he could say whatever he wants.
Clearly.
And
he just keeps getting charged with crimes, and nobody cares.
Yeah. And it's just counterintuitive. Again, I said last time, if that was one of your daughters, suddenly you might have a different viewpoint. But because it's not one of your daughters, you think, well, this is just all Joe Biden and it's all made up. And it's not clear thinking to devise and then believe these incredible conspiracies. Every single lawsuit. Yeah. And there are many. Yeah. There are over 90 indictments. Yeah. Every one of them is meritless, baseless. The Mar-a-Lago documents, you saw the photo, that's all. Well, Joe Biden had documents too. They're just for every single one of these indictments. He is 100% innocent. Yeah. And he's a complete victim of Joe Biden.
But that's the narcissist's way, right? That's what a narcissist does. They reverse and they make themselves a victim to their own bad behavior. I mean, it's classic.
It is classic. Though the polls do show that if he is convicted, if this thing happens before the election, if he's convicted, those same Republicans that are voting for him, it gets cut, his support gets cut in half.
But then what happens? Let's say that, October, something happens and he can't be president. What's the party going to do?
I think we're in uncharted waters. If he's convicted and has to be put in some kind of prison, which wouldn't be, it would be the kind of prison we'd all love to hang out in. But that would be uncharted, and the party would have to find a new nominee. But also these polls, there's this theory right now in the national polls, Trump's ahead by a point, 2 points, 3 points in the national poll, except we don't have a national poll. We have, 50 different races. Yeah. And it's interesting. I've heard some talking heads talk about the difference between, and I'm not going to get this right, but the difference between how people feel when they take these polls and when they're sitting in that voting booth. And since Trump got elected in 2016, the Republicans lost in 2018, 2020, 2022. Yeah. And many of these people think that when all is said and done, given all the chaos and everything else, that when people get in the booth, they just are not going to want that kind of chaos. His base will. Yeah. But he's got to win independent voters.
He has to. Right.
Ukraine. I think we need to talk about Ukraine. Okay. There is such division. And as a lifelong Republican, I signed up because I believe in the peace through strength ideology, the model. I know a lot of people don't agree with it, but I think that history has shown that the biggest nation has to be strong or they will not be a nation any longer. And it's been so interesting to see my party, the party of Reagan, the party of neoconservatives, back away from Ukraine. And I know you probably, maybe, I don't know, we haven't talked about it. Maybe you don't support the policy to support Ukraine. A lot of Democrats don't, or progressives don't, but it's remarkable to see my party become this isolationistic party where it's literally the Soviet, essentially the Soviet Union again under Putin. Right. It's Putin literally going in and taking over countries. And some Republicans, and certainly Trump, does not want to support Ukraine and wants to basically say...
Why is that? What's going on there?
Well, I think it's a mixture of populism. Like, what are we doing fighting over there? Who cares when we have people at the southern border? And so, remember FDR, the U.S. did not want to get into World War II. So it's this idea of why are we spending money in other countries? It's none of our business. So,
but they're not. that's an interesting take when it does seem like most Republicans are perfectly fine with the amount of money we're sending to Israel. Yep. So that's a strange.
It is, and there are affinities these days for Russia. It's just a true reality.
Well, Tucker Carlson just
Tucker
had
Carlson, and when Trump was president, I mean, he would never criticize Putin. In fact,
right.
he believed Putin over all of his security agencies that concluded that Russia did interfere with the 2016 election. And Trump, I don't know which world we're living in. He likes to praise dictators. He very openly praises the leader of China, the leader of South Korea, Putin. He loves these guys.
Right.
He loves strong men. There's no. I'm not being controversial here.
Yeah.
And now there's this wing of the Republican Party that's growing that basically wants to give up on Ukraine. And Biden, has a conservative viewpoint that if you let Ukraine fall, then what's next? Because Putin, Putin's going to end up dead or he keeps fighting wars. Those are the only two choices he has.
Yeah.
And so I just find it remarkable. Yeah, and your point about Israel is interesting as well. I think one of the things from a human rights point of view, is that there were 60 Minutes did a special, but they estimate well over 20,000 Ukrainian children who have been kidnapped. They've been kidnapped, they've been ripped away from their homes, and they've been taken to Russia to be re-educated. And that's a reality.
And in some cases, given to other families.
It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And I, again, wonder where is the moral outrage on issues like that. And I don't want to play poverty porn and compare that crisis to what happened in Palestine, which was indiscriminate killing of civilians, clearly got to a point where it was just way beyond self-defense. But it just, from a purely human rights issue, makes you wonder, where's that story?
Well, I mean, this is a tough one because I think many of us, especially as we're watching, the inconsistency of when America rushes in to rescue. And I think many of us are realizing it's not really about human rights. It's really about serving our own interests. And we are interested when we can benefit financially, and we are not when we can't.
There's certainly been precedent that would support that.
Yeah.
There's a documentary called Coup 53. 53, yeah. And it's about the Iranian coup and how the U.S. had backed the Shah, and it's hard to watch.
Yeah.
Our hands are not clean. We've done remarkable. I'll never forget seeing U2 at the Rose Bowl, and Bono, who is a progressive, in front of 100,000 people saying, "I've traveled the world. I have fought on behalf of so many causes. You are the most generous nation. Thank you so much." That can be true, and we can have really screwed up in many, many cases. That's where I'd like to be. So.
Well, on that note, all right, we will be back in a week or so to give you guys more updates. If you are enjoying this, please subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
See you next time.